This is Doctor Talks, real talk from real doctors on the issues that matter to you most.
Well, hello everyone. It's so good to see you, and I'm so excited to get into talking about the most common mental health disorder out there, anxiety. And we're going to talk with one of really the leading proponents and leading experts around anxiety and food. You just heard her bio. Trudy, it's such a treat to see you. It's been quite a while since we've worked together, but I think I was just talking with you. One of the very first summits I did way back when the Happiness Diet was published in 2011 was with you. You're really one of the first people to kind of know what I was doing and celebrate nutritional psychiatry. So I am really, really delighted to have you here in the Anxiety and Depression Solutions Summit. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Dr. Randy. Thanks for having me. And yes, that was a long time ago, and there's still so much that we can share about the connection between diet and anxiety. So I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's get right into this. I mean, as a nutritional psychiatrist, I've been so interested in anxiety and its relationship with food. There's so many different ways it relates. Often we just think about the nutrients that cause or don't cause, but so much about our eating behavior can be triggered by worried or anxious thoughts. So much of how sometimes we try and calm ourselves down can be related to anxiety. Certainly can at times sap our diet, but I'd love to hear your perspective and your thought. What is the relationship between diet and anxiety?
Well, there's a huge relationship, and it's really exciting that this connection is being recognized. A lot of people still, even though there's your amazing work and there's a lot of other pioneers in this area of nutritional psychiatry, which I'll talk about in a second, a lot of people aren't aware that anxiety can be purely biochemical, or that it can be mostly biochemical, or even if there's a psychological trauma or something else going on, there can be a biochemical aspect that is making things worse. And there are certain foods, which we'll talk about today, that can trigger anxiety, increase your fears, cause phobias, cause panic attacks, make you feel overwhelmed, cause ruminating thoughts, and affect your sleep, all really closely tied to these foods that you put in your mouth, nutrients that you might be depleted in, foods and things that cause nutrient deficiencies. And there's this, you mentioned nutritional psychiatry. And for folks who don't know, there's this new field called nutritional psychiatry. And I just love and appreciate the International Society for Nutritional Psychiatry Research, which I know you're part of and very much aware of. But for folks who don't know, there was a position paper published by the organization in 2015 in World Psychiatry, which is the official journal of the World Psychiatric Association. And they published this position statement talking about nutritional medicine in modern psychiatry, and saying how diet and nutrition are modifiable targets for the prevention of mental disorders, which includes anxiety, and have a fundamental role in the promotion of mental health. And I appreciate the fact that they talk about dietary modification, but they also in this paper mention nutrients that can help, and they talk about B vitamins, omega-3s, choline, iron, zinc, magnesium, vitamin D, and amino acids, which is central to my work. And they say, although we advocate for these nutrients to be consumed as part of the diet, additional select use of these nutraceuticals may also be justified. So we always want to think about diet first, and then there is a place for some of these nutrients depending on the person and depending on what their unique biochemistry is. And we can use the diet, and we can also use the nutrients. And we both know Professor Felice Jacka, a prolific Australian researcher, founder of the International Society of Nutritional Psychiatry Research, and a trailblazer. And it's just really exciting to be able to share her work and just share the importance of diet and nutrients when it comes to anxiety.
Felice's work and the International Society of Nutrition and Psychiatry Research, really, too, an organization and a person who really have spearheaded this nutritional psychiatry movement. And Trudy, it's great to mention because I kind of assume everybody's heard about nutritional psychiatry because when I started this work, that wasn't a word, and it's become something kind of trendy and people are excited about it. But it's really important for you to note a lot of folks, and even maybe some people watching right now, haven't really thought about the connection between food and anxiety before. I see this happen all the time, really well-informed patients that I'm working with who have something like a clinical depression, and they've never really thought that what they eat affects how they feel in the significant way that the research is showing us it does. I'd love to hear as you kind of think through those categories that you just went through of some of the nutrients. Can you tell us kind of, do you have a rank of importance when you, like, as people are listening, you said, your work, for example, centers on the omega-3s. Is that like the most important one in your mind that we think about, or are all of them important? Is there kind of a, I don't know, top anxiety nutrient in your mind?
I think it depends on each individual. So the omega-3s are definitely important. The B vitamins, a lot of them are cofactors, certainly something like vitamin B6 and vitamin B12. They're cofactors for making some of our neurotransmitters. If someone is iron deficient, that's going to definitely affect neurotransmitter production. So our neurotransmitters, for example, like GABA and serotonin, help with different types of anxiety. Zinc is a key one, I find, because zinc is a very common deficiency, and so is magnesium. So vitamin D as well is a common deficiency, less so now because there's a lot more awareness about vitamin D, I think, and we need good vitamin D levels in order to have good serotonin production. And then the amino acids, individual amino acids, is something that I use extensively in my work to address low levels of neurotransmitters while we're addressing all the underlying causes. So I'll use GABA and I'll use tryptophan, I'll use D-phenylalanine. But, I think it really depends on the individual, depends on their biochemistry, depends on their diet, depends on their stress levels, and maybe genetics as well. So that all of these factors play a role. And we just need to figure out what's going to work for what is deficient in each person and what they actually need.
Are there ways that anxiety and anxiety symptoms affect appetite or kind of food and eating behaviors?
I see this a lot from a purely biochemical aspect. There are a number of mechanisms where we see anxiety and cravings go hand in hand. So for example, with the low GABA type of anxiety, and this is the kind of anxiety where you've got physical tension, you'll feel stiff and tense in your muscles, you may feel tight in your belly, you may feel that butterflies in your belly, so it's sort of more of a physical kind of anxiety. I'll see that carbohydrate cravings ramp up when you're feeling more stressed. So you'll use carbs or sugar as a way to self-medicate in order to calm yourself down. And then for some people with low GABA, they will self-medicate with alcohol. So that's another type of craving or an addiction, but they'll use this in order to relax and to fit in socially. And then with the low serotonin kind of anxiety, and this is more the sort of ruminations, the worrying, the obsessing, fears and phobias, the afternoon and evening cravings are what we see for sugar and carbohydrates, because this is when serotonin levels start to dip, and then you'll eat sugar or carbs in order to calm down, in order to feel good. So those are just some of the examples that I see.
Trudy, as you're talking, I think a lot of people in the wellness world and in the nutrition world and in the integrative world, have had a lot of question about like the biochemical nature of anxiety. And as a psychiatrist, that's always felt pretty clear to me. That's how the model in which I was trained and how I see this. And it just struck me as you're talking that, you really think in terms of things like serotonin and GABA. And I was wondering, being part of the wellness world, how has that struck you when kind of this foundational idea about depression and anxiety that they do relate to chemicals in our brain, that's attacked? I'm wondering, how does that sit with you and kind of how do you help patients understand that?
Are you referring to the serotonin hypothesis being attacked and saying that it's not related to low
Yeah.
serotonin. I think we need to recognize that for some people, the anxiety can be related to low serotonin, but also recognize that there are many underlying causes, and this is just one cause. I don't think we want to just say it's all low serotonin. I know that's certainly been what the message has been for a long time when it comes to depression, that it's just low serotonin, and then there's saying, well, it's not low serotonin. So I think we need to recognize that, just like we just talked about which nutrients do we use, for each specific person, low serotonin could be a factor, and I see it to be a common deficiency in a lot of people. But there could be low GABA, there could be infections that are contributing to the anxiety, there could be toxins, there could be inflammation, it could be the gut. So there's a lot of other underlying root causes that we need to consider when it comes to some of the mechanisms that, contributing to this biochemical, root cause of anxiety.
Trudy, as you're talking, I hope people hear the hopefulness. I think sometimes, so many different things that can contribute if you're having symptoms with anxiety or depression, and it can sound like there's a lot to do or a lot to check off, but I hear a lot of hopefulness in what you're saying, that, a lot of different factors contribute. Some are new, like the microbiome. I also like how you're differentiating the types of worry. If you're scared about going into the classroom or public speaking, that's different than if you have a ruminative worry, an idea you can't get out of your head, or an obsessive worry, which is all, kind of different than other types of anxiety. For example, if you have more panic or a specific phobia. And so really being very clear with yourself and kind of the types of anxiety that you're having. There's also where it's great to talk to a mental health professional and kind of, I meet a lot of patients who describe their anxiety and experience it in a certain way. And then as I'm sitting with them, it seems a little different to me in terms of some of the triggers or some of the causes or some things that people maybe hadn't been asked about. So I really appreciate all that in what you're sharing, and how you're asking us to really be circumspect when we're thinking about the symptom of anxiety. It's not as simple as, one neurotransmitter, or it's not as simple as, one bad trigger food, but these are things that we want to consider and think about when we're being circumspect about anxiety. I was wondering if there are specific foods. I mean, there's so much that we're seeing about ultra-processed foods and its link to depression. We've seen so much about dietary pattern and that more modern or more kind of a processed food or Western dietary pattern. That was actually Felice Jacka's first paper, came out in the Green Journal, the American Journal of Psychiatry, the first really ever nutritional psychiatry paper. It was her graduate thesis. It was a correlational study looking at a Western dietary pattern. And what made all the headlines was how a Western dietary pattern was correlated with an increased risk of depression. It's also interesting, in that study, there was also an increased risk of anxiety disorders with a Western dietary pattern. But I'm curious about the foods that you see most commonly triggering anxiety, and I'm particularly interested in the ultra-processed foods, these new modern foods that are kind of infiltrated most people's diets, and which of those are the worst culprits?
Yes, and I'm glad you quoted Professor Jacka's paper. That was one of the articles, one of the papers that I actually quoted in my book when it came out, because it was so profound, and it was so exciting to see that there was research around this. And she's since gone on to publish many, many papers with different populations. And this was, I think that one was with women in Australia. She went on and did a similar, study on children, and then different population groups in different countries. So it's really exciting that she's looked at junk food and what she calls a traditional diet, or, the junk food is the ultra processed. We call it,
I like you calling it junk food. I think Felice, we both know Felice, she'd want us to call it junk food or garbage food. I mean, I like her fieriness and she's very brave.
Yes.
I think a lot of us are a little, maybe, I don't know, I wouldn't say we pull punches, but I like the way that Felice talks about processed food and large food companies in very explicit terms, and holding them culpable, that these aren't really foods that are going to help our health or our mental health.
Right. And she calls it traditional diet, or which we could call a whole foods, real foods, quality food. So and part of that junk food or ultra processed food is the sugar. So when you're consuming a lot of sugary foods, firstly, it fills you up, so you're less likely to eat more nutrient dense foods. But that sugar will deplete some of the same nutrients that we need to make our
Yeah, I was
neurotransmitters,
saying,
like zinc.
we're
And I mentioned
burning
how that,
fuels. And anytime you burn fuels, you're making energy, but you're also creating a lot of waste products. And the thing about these simple sugars is they don't come with any of the nutrients that help us deal with the processing of the energy or the processing of the waste products. And it's just kind of a hint. They're like, I think about their takers. They can't, these foods can't make it on their own. And I think the foods that you tend to recommend, and we'll get to those after we talk about trigger foods, they're foods that come with a lot. They bring a lot to the table. They're here to kind of contribute to your body. They've got some extra nutrients they can lend into the fight. And I really like that about them, as opposed to these processed foods where it's like, they're always showing up like, anybody have any zinc to help me deal with myself? And it's just, it's not who you want to your party, right? You want to bring to your party somebody who's going to show up to the potluck with something delicious and nutrient dense that they've made with love. And I think about that as all the foods that we're eating. But I'm cutting you off, Trudy. You're telling us a little bit about some of the trigger foods, high sugar foods, lots of sugar, and these ultra processed foods. Tell us a little bit more of what are on the list for things we need to look out for in our diet that could be triggering anxiety.
yes, I've got another few I wanted to add, but just going back to the whole sugar thing, is the sugar aspect is that we self-medicate to feel calm, to feel comforted, to feel rewarded, to feel happy. So if we've got low GABA, if we've got low serotonin, we're using that sugar, that junk food as a treat, as a reward to make us feel good. So and then it makes things worse. So we do want to always mention that. And then tied into the sugar is blood sugar swings. So if we are eating sugary foods, certainly having a sugary food or carbohydrate at breakfast time, that's going to give us a spike in blood sugar, and then we're going to get a crash, and then we're going to want more sugar, and then we're going to spike in blood sugar, and then a crash. So that's going to give us this roller coaster of anxiety, focus issues, fatigue issues, and start, stress the adrenals and cause these nutrient deficiencies. So an important thing is to have quality protein, healthy fats at breakfast. That's going to prevent those blood sugar swings. But then the other thing is that we don't want to forget about is some of the food sensitivities that are very common triggers for anxiety. And one of them is gluten. And we often think about gluten affecting the gut, causing leaky gut, or causing constipation or diarrhea. But there's plenty of research showing it can trigger anxiety, social anxiety, even depression and schizophrenia. So this is bread, cookies, pasta. And for many people, it's very challenging to quit. I actually had one client, she was in her 40s, and she said quitting bread was more difficult to quit than when she had to quit cocaine that she was addicted to in her 20s. So there's these gluteomorphins, which opioid-like compounds found in gluten. When you start digesting it, these compounds are produced, and that makes it very addicting. And I mentioned that the amino acids, which is the main focus of my work, and that can help break the addiction. So these diet changes are much easier to make. Now, some people can just give up sugar, they can just give up gluten using willpower, but for some people, they need the amino acids, so they don't have to use willpower and they don't have to.
Yeah, I saw there was
I'll use
there was a
tryptophan or
gluten
DPA.
sensitivity study with gluten. People who had gluten sensitivity, the anxiety rates were sort of 75+%, and then when they adopted a gluten-free diet, it dropped down to the same rates as the control group. And so, certainly with people with those sensitivities, it's one of the great things with more awareness and more testing. It's something that more people are aware of. But even people who have frank celiac disease and autoimmune disease to gluten, half of people with that disease don't even know about it. And so that can be a huge game changer. What are some of the other culprits on your list, Trudy?
Caffeine. And that's a tough one, Doctor.
Yeah.
A lot of my clients will say, I'll give up sugar, I'll give up bread and cookies, but don't
Mm.
take my caffeine away. Don't take my coffee away. I need it. It's a ritual. It's something that I like to do in the morning on my own. It's really something that I can't give up. And there are some individuals that are more susceptible. There's a gene, CYP1A2, that determines how fast we metabolize coffee. So for some people, a little bit of coffee is just a huge trigger for anxiety. And actually, there was a study done in 1989. It was a very small study, but the people in the study had generalized anxiety and panic disorder. None had benefited from medication or therapy. They were only consuming 1.5 to 3.5 cups of coffee a day, but within a week of stopping the coffee, their anxiety disappeared. So I see this all the time. There's no point in making all these other wonderful changes. And we're going to talk about some foods that are really beneficial. If caffeine is a trigger for you, then you need to think about giving up caffeine. And you can drink rooibos tea, you can drink chamomile tea. There's a lot of wonderful herbal teas that, great to drink, and you're not getting that caffeine fix. And I'm just talking about coffee here, but when we're talking about caffeine, we need to think about the double whammy. When you're drinking a soda, you're getting the sugar and you're also getting the caffeine.
That's great.
as
And I
well.
think also folks listening, exploring, I've had periods where I drank decaf. If you like all those polyphenols that you get in your coffee, you can go to something that's decaffeinated. There are a lot of wonderful products now that are doing a third calf or half calf, where you can kind of dial in the caffeine a little bit or wean yourself off. And then, as Trudy mentioned, all kinds of wonderful teas. Periods in my life where I've gotten off coffee for whatever reason, I've got a real nice Earl Grey addiction to replace it. And, maybe that's not perfect in the sense I'm still taking in some caffeines, but I really found it was less caffeine and it helped. And I love your recommendations that, if you're a caffeine sensitive person, Trudy, is there a way, if, someone like me, I've been habituated for coffee for a long time. I think a lot of physicians are. I start my day, I don't think about it as a treat. I just it's coffee with some half and half is my first caloric intake. And usually the only thing I eat for, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours, a couple hours maybe. Is there a way, are we looking that, if it is coffee or caffeine sensitive, we're going to notice maybe more anxiety or panicky or kind of worried symptoms like in the hour after we drink our caffeinated beverage? Or is it something that you see in your client shows up at different times of the day? Or kind of how do we know?
For most people, I have found that it's pretty soon after the caffeine intake. They're feeling agitated, maybe a pounding heart, maybe a little bit restless. And for some people, they'll say, I only have 1 cup or I only have 2 cups and I only have it before noon, and I'm still anxious in the afternoon and I still can't sleep. And they're not convinced that stopping it will make a difference. But when they do notice a difference. So even having it in the morning can affect your sleep. Even having it early in the day does seem to trigger anxiety later in the day for some people. So again, Dr. Ramsey, I think it's very individualized as to how it impacts people.
Well, Trudy, thank you for that. Let's talk about some of the solutions, some of your favorite foods I'm really interested in that you see helping patients with anxiety and why you recommend them. What are some of the top food prescriptions you see on your prescription path?
Well, obviously, we've got to just recap and say the real foods that we were talking about when it comes to the work of Professor Felice Jacker. So that's just goes without saying. But when we're honing in on some of those real foods, a big one is quality animal protein. I'm a big fan of grass-fed red meat, for example. What it's going to do, it's the amino acids providing the building blocks of protein and making neurotransmitters. Red meat is a great source of zinc. It's a great source of iron, great source of omega-3s. A lot of people just think of oily fish as being a source of omega-3s, but grass-fed red meat does have omega-3s, and we talked about those nutrients earlier, cofactors for making our neurotransmitters. The other thing about animal protein and having it first thing in the morning is that it's helping with blood sugar stability. So I have my clients have protein at breakfast, And it could be dinner for breakfast, leftover stew. It could be lamb steak. It could be eggs. Obviously, pastured eggs are going to be a better choice. It could be chicken broth. Leftover dinner is perfect. Or it could be, some sort of breakfast that's made up. And having that protein first thing in the morning sets you up for the rest of the day and is providing all of these beautiful nutrients that I'm talking about. Now, the important thing, Dr. Ramsey, is with protein, we need to make sure digestion is good. There's not much point in eating this good quality protein if we're not able to break down the amino acids into the constituents that we need for making neurotransmitters and getting access to those nutrients. So for some people, we need to think about what's going on in the gut. Are they producing enough hydrochloric acid? Do they have enough protease? Do they have enough of these other enzymes? But certainly quality animal protein, I'm a big fan of. And that also includes the well-recognized source of omega-3s like wild salmon, sardines. I grew up in South Africa, and we used to have a sardine run up the coast every year, and I'm a big fan of
What's you
sardines.
said, a sardine run? What's a sardine run? Like you go up the coast to get fresh sardine?
The sardines went up the coast of the east coast of South Africa, and they beach themselves on the beach. So you can they'll have the media out with the helicopters telling you where the sardines are going to beach, and everyone goes to the beach, and all the sardines come into the beach, and you just catch sardines in buckets and in your clothing, and it's just a real fun time, and it's just a crazy scene to see.
Trudy, will you take me like sardine beaching? I mean, I've never even heard of this. It sounds a little bit like a fever dream to me, the idea that I could be out with you and lots of people grabbing sardines off the beach. You just like cook them right there on the beach, like they get some fires going?
Yeah, we in South Africa, barbecue is called a braai vleis, and you'll put the grill on the coals or the wood, and you'll make sardines and just enjoy the sunset and get out in nature. It's just amazing.
I mean, that sounds absolutely amazing. And I think it's also such a wonderful piece of culture to share with us. And one of the pieces of nutritional psychiatry and the frameworks that we've proposed in our clinician training and in my books is really asking clinicians to think about the cultures and cultures of origin and traditions that people love. If I were working with Trudy, this story would light me up so much as a clinician. And if she were depressed or anxious and let's say hadn't been eating sardines, you can appreciate how a clinician thoughtfully getting excited and encouraging sardine consumption gets her all of these amazing nutrients. Get the calcium, one of the top sources of calcium, sardines and anchovies, all those little small bones, all the omega-3 fats we've been talking about, all these B vitamins and iodine, of course, this is a seafood and selenium, all the wonder nutrients in sardines. She'd get all those, but she'd also get this taste of her upbringing and taste of something that her country is amazing at in terms of like celebrating sardines, having a big beach party. And so it's one of those things in your life as you're thinking about your symptoms of anxiety and depression. You're wondering kind of what of these lessons help, which of these kind of food should I focus on? I always ask people to look to your past and your family's past and kind of your microculture. I don't think about sardines as a huge South African food because I don't know anything about South African food. But if I were working with Trudy as a client and as you're thinking about your health, it's such an important, you can see it's such an important and cool piece of her nutritional psychiatry history if you take it in a proper way. So thank that. What a cool thing. So sorry to go off on the sardine tangent there, but it is one of those foods that I certainly hope the summit helps you eat more of. We've been talking about some red meat, some sardines, and oily, fatty fishes. I think we're both fans, besides the beach fresh sardines. These are great anchovies and sardines to get tinned because they're fresh. You keep them, they stay, or that they're canned fresh, so you don't have to worry about them spoiling. Very economical and just easy to add into a pasta, to a salad, all kinds of ways. So what else besides these two protein sources do you like for anxiety, Trudy?
I've got another one that I'm going to share, Dr. Ramsey, but I just love the fact that you're so excited about the sardines, and it's just so interesting. I want to add another little tidbit about that is there's so many sardines that are caught that they're actually used in pet food. So the cats and dogs in South Africa are very well nourished because they're getting a lot of sardines as well. So there's another little aspect to it, which I think is pretty interesting.
It's also one of that is very interesting. It's not only good for us. It's one of those things we don't think about a lot. But the pet food industry is a huge industry, and there's been a lot of, I think, just like with human food, there's been a lot of concerns. We love our pets. We want to feed them healthy stuff. That's not what's in a lot of pet food. So let's talk about some of your favorite plants for anxiety.
I was going to just mention fermented foods, and that's plants because it's sauerkraut. So yes, let's talk about a combination. So sauerkraut is wonderful because it's providing those probiotics for gut health, and we know about the gut-brain connection. Yogurt, if dairy is tolerated as well. And I remember the first time I heard the term psychobiotic, I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I know you know Dr. Ted Dinan as well. I had the opportunity of interviewing him on one of my summits as well. He's a professor of psychiatry in Ireland, and he published a paper, I think it was around 2011 or 12, the paper was called Psychobiotics, a Novel Class of Psychotropic. And for anyone who doesn't know what a psychobiotic is, in the paper he writes about it being a live organism that, when ingested in adequate amounts, produces health benefits in patients suffering from psychiatric illness, which could include anxiety as well. So the paper goes on to say it produces and delivers neuroactive substances such as gamma-aminobutyric acid, which is GABA, and serotonin, which act on the gut-brain axis. And him and his team, as you know, Dr. Ramsey, have gone on to publish multiple papers on psychobiotics. So I'm a big fan of fermented foods like sauerkraut, and I think they have a big role to play in anyone's diet, and certainly in the diet of individuals who have anxiety.
Yeah, that's just been really one of the big shifts in my clinical practice. There's more enthusiasm and excitement because oftentimes that I have when I'm talking about fermented foods, especially with patients with anxiety. It seems like the data really, anxiety, depression, and one study for mania and bipolar disorder that wasn't a fermented foods, but it was a probiotics. But, really interesting and intriguing notion that one of the ways to kind of shift symptoms of anxiety is through shifting the diversity of the microbiome. So that's a great food category. I love that one. So we've got some good animal proteins like healthy grass-fed beef. We've got some oily fish. We've got some fermented foods. Bring us home with some delicious plants. What are your favorites?
I love non-starchy vegetables such as cauliflower, broccoli, asparagus, you name it. Anything that's organic, preferably, because if it's not, you're going to have the issue with the pesticides, which not going to do you any favors. So all of these healthy vegetables should be part of the diet as well. And I like to personally, and what I recommend to my client is find a way that you like to enjoy vegetables. Personally, I like to steam them with lots of butter. They can be roasted with olive oil as well. They can be made into a soup and blended up. So there's many ways to enjoy
I really appreciate you mentioning that, Trudy, and I'm sure people listening also appreciate it, because so often it's like, do you like cauliflower? It's like, that's it's one thing. And, you're talking raw cauliflower? Are you talking like sauteed? Are you talking about cauliflower steak? Are you making a puree or a soup? Or, there's so many different ways to making a pizza with a cauliflower crust. And so really, both the diversity of plants that we eat, but also working a little bit on your skills and I'd say your enjoyment in preparing vegetables in a variety of different ways. I take a lot of pleasure in my kale game. I can make a lot of different ways for you. I've worked on that over the years. And so I think it's a great piece of encouragement. Well, if you came into this conversation with any question of how diet and anxiety are related, I hope you've gotten a little mini masterclass here from Trudy Scott. Along with this conversation, Trudy has generously given some wonderful free resources for the summit, the types of resources she uses with her clients who are struggling with symptoms of anxiety, certainly in healing the modern brain. This is really one of the ways that we feel that mental fitness and lifestyle interventions really is foundational to things like taking care of worry and anxiety. And Trudy, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge, everybody. It's been a wonderful, wonderful episode, and I appreciate so much your time and attention. I ask you the same question at the end of every one of these, which is, I hope that one of the things that stuck out with you, my request, I'd say your cost of admission, in my opinion, is that you do something specifically with each one of these talks. Something, whether maybe just Trudy mentioned asparagus and you thought, yum, I haven't had those for a while. Or maybe there's something about the microbiome or the way that Trudy, with all of her knowledge about anxiety and food, got you kind of excited about making some sauerkraut. Whatever struck you, it's my request that you do something about it. We know that awareness helps us, but awareness doesn't do anything unless we turn it into action. And that's my request of you, everyone. I'll see you in the next talk. Thank you so much for being with us for the Anxiety and Depression Solutions Summit. I'm Dr. Drew Ramsey. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to Doctor Talks. We hope today's episode has enlightened and inspired you on your path to optimal health. Each day is a new opportunity to make choices that empower your well-being. For more insights and strategies, subscribe to our podcast and visit our website, www.drtalks.com. Stay connected, stay healthy, and join us next time on Doctor Talks, real talks from real doctors on the issues that matter to you most.